So the sake of this conversation is that we're discussing how to create courses, how to create assignments, how to add questions into those assignments within Adapt. So this is just basically an introduction to using Adapt. This will be recorded for people in order to access after the fact, and it's a pretty straightforward approach. So the first thing in order to bring up here is if you already have an Adapt account, feel free to sign in order to follow along with us. If you don't have an Adapt account, you can request an Adapt account. Let me log out here by just clicking under Contact Us and then Contact Support, and it will have an indication here where you can say, I want an account, not an account issue. I think that works as account issue in order to be able to move it forward here. This is a new system that we just introduced a few weeks ago, so I'm still a little uncomfortable with it. Okay, anyways, with that, let's get this thing going. So for those of you that need a little bit of a refresher, the Adapt homework system is the homework system that we have been building for the last 4 years, thanks primarily to the support of the California Education Learning Lab. That is an organization run with the support of the state of California. The legislature authorized that learning lab back in 2018, I believe, and they have supported us in building Adapt to the tune of about $5 million now. We also received a little bit of funding from the U.S. Department of Education in the beginning. Before the Learning Lab funds stepped up off of here. So the intent of the Adapt homework system is to build an infrastructure that can accompany the textbook infrastructure that we have in place, is such that we're able to generate the tools in order to take the place of commercial publishers in the classroom. I oftentimes liken them to golden handcuffs, where commercial publishers come in and they say, well, here's the homework system, but you also get this with the textbook. Here's the ancillary materials, here's the presentations, here's the question bank. And by having access to all these goodies, they essentially constitute golden handcuffs, such that in order to extricate the students from this commercial infrastructure, phrase that, faculty, you need to be able to provide the tools in order to be able to do that across the board. And with homework, it's a time-consuming process because there's a lot of complexities in terms of the technology that you need to be able to build or implement in order to do that, in addition to the complexities of building questions and building the corpus of content that we have out there. So in the last 4 years, we've constructed the Adapt system, which we're going to go through momentarily, and we've harvested or built or augmented somewhere in the order of 220,000 questions for the faculty, for students to use in their classroom, that faculty then select and use from that. Now, we still have a long way in order to go with what we wanted to address. We're bringing in question banks as quickly as we can. In fact, we're bringing them faster than we're able to convert to auto-grade or write solutions for and augment those questions. So many of the questions that are available here are just largely the questions in an open-ended perspective, but they can advance, and they will advance as we continue to address the development of the corpus. So in other words, what we're focusing right now is on quality and quality when it comes to question infrastructure. But we also have a lot of technology developments. That aside, let's get into the details associated with these things. So we have a very functional front end that's going to be changing soon. And the idea behind building courses or functional courses is a hierarchy. So we have a series of courses. Inside every course is multiple assignments. Inside multiple assignments are multiple questions. That's a simple perspective. There's another layer below that, which is the library layer, which basically hosts all 220,000 questions that you're able to access. Now, the key point behind Adapt is to build an infrastructure that facilitates a community-based approach. So in other words, making a system so that anyone can create a question, anyone can use that question, but still use it in a controlled fashion such that you don't have issues with fidelity and changes and things like that. And we've implemented implemented a handful of different aspects in order to facilitate that community-based aspect of an adapt. That has been one of the bigger challenges that we have in terms of building the adapt infrastructure. So again, like I mentioned, courses, assignments, questions, and then a library level that you have access to down there. Now, so let's create a question, a course. So when you sign in here, and I've signed in here with my faculty account, so I have a lot of courses that I've been using Adapt for over the last several years. I have the ability to create a new course, which I'm going to do momentarily, but I also have the ability to import an existing course. So if someone has a course that I'm particularly interested in, and that course is public, I have the ability in order to import that course. If I just click that button there, I can come in and say something like introduction in, let's do American Sign Language. I can select that course and I can import it. It'll just take a moment here. And I'm basically bringing in that course, which means I'm bringing in the top level. I'm bringing in the assignments and bringing in the questions that have been organized around that assignment. It brings it in right here. Things that are highlighted in red hue, if you're able to see that, is not open for students in order to see. It's like a circuit breaker turning it off. It doesn't really matter for the point of our conversation because we're not looking at this from the student perspective. We're looking at this from the faculty's perspective. And you can see here that this specific course has 4 assignments. The assignments are not numbered. Typically, I recommend numbering them. If I go to one of the assignments, I can then see that this one here has only 1 question associated with it. So it's not nearly as fleshed out as some other courses that you may have access to. And this one here has a single question that's connected to that assignment. I clicked on that assignment, that question, and I can see what it is because this is American Sign Language. It's a sign language very much organized around visual. So it has a video-based question instead of a text-based question that you might experience in social sciences, or a math-based question that you might see in more numerical-based fields. Anyways, I digress. Let me delete this course, which I'm going to do right here. Just as a check in order to make sure I really want to delete it. And let me show you one of the courses that I have active right now. And this is a general chemistry course that I am teaching this term. Again, course assignment question level. So here are all the assignments that are in place. I have a lot of assignments in the way I do my courses, where I have weekly homeworks, I have practice, which is formative, I have lecture homeworks, which are due every term, every lecture. I have labs, I have weekly homeworks, I have practice examples and things like that. It's a very rich, complex course infrastructure that I've been honing over several years, and no doubt I'm going to be honing in for the next several years because I'm always trying to optimize these things. So I can go into one of these assignments, let's say lecture 1, and if I click on it, I can see I have 3 questions that are connected to in this assignment. You'll also notice that these things have different titles. And this one here is 5.13. This is 2. This is lecture 1.3. It's because these questions come from a variety of different sources, and people number them differently because they're different sources. Students don't see the titles. They just see basically question 1, question 2, question 3, or I can come in and I can edit a new title on top of it in order to give students a little bit more context behind that. And that's about that. So let's go back into creating a new course. So in this case here, once this thing pops up, let me go out of my course. I want to click new course. So again, what happened here? Something bug happened. That's not so good, and it's embarrassing to show, even though it's popping up without an issue. I'll take a look at that in a moment. But anyways, here we go. It's generating a new course. The course has a series of things that you need to enter into them. These questions are not surprising, or most of them are not surprising, because of the same sort of questions that you would address if you were making a course in a learning management system or in a wide variety of other platforms that's out there. So the first one is to recognize what school that we're at. I'm going to say at the University of California, Davis, where I'm a professor of chemistry at. You can write down, you can identify any of your campuses that's put on here. We have all the campuses in the US and in Canada, at least as of last year, although it's always a changing list. One of the reasons that we have this set up here is that if your campus is set up in order to use to couple to your learning management system, such that when students submit answers for a question, and we can then submit the scores from grading that submission directly into your learning management system. But that requires manual coupling between the campus's learning management system and Adapt. And that may be a quick process or a slow process. Certainly functionally, it's an easy process, but you may have paperwork in order to be able to complete from that. And that takes a bit of time. So anyways, I'm in the University of California. I'm going to say this is my special course. You can write anything out. This right here is a public description, which means that when students can come in, they can see that if they're enrolled in the course, or if you're doing a search through courses, you can take a look at the public description off of there in order to evaluate if it's the course that you feel that you're most interested in. This is an introductory course on being special and such. A private description is a description that when I sign in, I can see. Students don't see it. It provides a mechanism to give context that I don't want students to be able to evaluate. For example, if after the class is over, I could put some private notes in here before I do the class again, saying I want to address this, and this. It can be used as a de facto annotation, even though you're not really annotating, you're just providing notes connected to the assignment, like I love cats, which is a very good private description to add for my course. If my course is connected to a textbook, I can pin the link of the textbook here. That could be a LibreText book, that could be an OpenStax book, that could be any other resource that you have a link connected to it. It's optional. You don't have to actually answer this. I'm going to leave this modality at traditional, which is how most people do these things. But if we actually want to be able to make questions that you can distribute freely, such that students don't need to sign in, then you make formative only, and anonymous is also a different version off of there. It's a bit more nuanced. That's not important for this conversation. I will mention that anytime you see a little question here, question mark that is, you should be able to hover over it and then get a response in terms of providing some guidance behind it. It's called a tooltip. In that case, I'm going to keep this thing traditional. The section. So a section, and again, this is metadata, could be one, for example. When I teach my upper divisional classes, I oftentimes have 16 sections in my class of 500 students, where each section is connected to a specific date and time for their lab and their discussion. So different students are added to different sections, and this provides a mechanism for me able to control end dates and such for different sections. But for now, I just write down section 1 in order to keep things going. The course registration number is a number connected to that course on your campus. It's also relatively optional. If you connect your course to Canvas via LTI, this is completely unnecessary. I'm going to mention that the term is also optional, but if you do things like winter 2024, it makes it convenient in order to recognize which courses are from which times that you're teaching it. The start date and the end date are, I didn't write that down, there we go, are self-explanatory. I can decide if I want this course to be public, meaning that other faculty can see that course exists, or private. The key benefit off of this is that if you create something that you want other people to use and share, then you obviously want it to be public. I will mention that students don't ever see that the course exists unless you give an access code for them to register for it. So in other words, this public-private has nothing to do with students. It's only for other instructors on our infrastructure. And alpha is a little bit more complicated. The old term that we may have for this thing would be master-slave. And the idea behind here is essentially that you may want to create one course that you can have secondary courses that are tethered to your one course, so that when you update your primary course, all the secondary courses can benefit from that updating. That provides an opportunity that if you're, for example, handling a series of courses that adjuncts are coming in order to address, you want to be able to make sure that the adjuncts have access to the most up-to-date resources available in order to teach their class. The same thing also applies if you have a handful of faculty that are teaching the same class. Let me phrase it, the same type of class, but they have their own unique classes. Oftentimes I have in my department, 5 people who are teaching introductory chemistry. This provides a mechanism for them to be locked together and understand what other people are using in their respective courses. I'm going to keep that as no for now. And the last one is LMS. If this were if UC Davis had hooked up their LMS, which I have not asked them to do, it would give me the option to flip a switch here in order to be able to make it an LMS enabled course or not. But in this case here, I do not. Some of you may be in a course, maybe making a course in a campus that already has LTI set up, and then you'll have a flip a switch here in order to be able to do it. Again, when you flip this switch, when it becomes available, it means that you are coupling your course to a learning management system course so that you can pass the grades through. And that requires manual linking or automatic linking, depending upon the nature of the technology between the 2 different platforms. So anyways, if I do this right and I press save, it won't come up with an error, which I did it right because I went step by step. If I missed one of the things that's required, it will come up with an error saying, you need to go fix this one specific topic here. You can go through and address it as you see fit. So anyways, this comes in and it's has this red hue. Again, like I mentioned before, a red hue means that students don't see it. That's perfectly fine. Students are not enrolled in this at all. I'm going to click on the link right here. And then it pops up my course. Now, it's not a terribly impressive course because there are no assignments in here and there are no questions and obviously the assignments that are missing. It's just basically a top level overview that's there. I have the ability in order to create new assignments, which I'm going to be doing momentarily. I have the ability to import other assignments from other courses. If I want to be able to bring in, and this provides a more nuanced approach in order to be able to populate my course rather than importing an entire course and then modifying it like that. I have access to a course gradebook, but it's not going to be impressive here because I have no assignments and I have no students. And then we have course properties, and that's what I want to be able to discuss right here. So we created, if I click on this button here, we addressed this general information when we created the course, but there are lots of other pieces of information connected to the course as we actually function. And I understand that there's a lot of details associated with this, but these are details necessary in order to provide the flexibility in order to be able to use adapt in a wide variety of different pedagogies. You can think of it as akin to why your learning management system has a bit of complexity associated with it, because there are lots of different ways that people would use that learning management system productively. So let's just go through these course properties relatively quickly here. We're already looking at the course information. We went through all of these things right now. The only thing that popped up is this thing called whitelisted domains. I'll address that in a moment. It's connected with account enrollment procedures. We have sections. Under the section option, it then says that I have one section in this course. It gives me an empty CRN number for it, in this case 1, and it gives me an access code. If I share this access code by just copying it and pasting it into emails or anything else, any student that has an account on Adapt can then enroll in your course. So this is the principal mechanism that we have right now for students being able to enroll in the course. This will change soon, where we'll have a rostering system so that you can give a list of email addresses, and students then can only register if they're on that list of email addresses. We have an infrastructure for whitelisting domains where you can say that only students that have emails that are connected to your campus are able to register. The reason for this is that when you share your access code to students, oftentimes students will sign up and enroll with multiple email accounts. So some will have Gmail, some will use Yahoo, some will use their campus email address, and they bounce around for a variety of reasons. Not entirely sure why this happens, but this causes a bit of confusion on the student side because they don't know which account that they've signed in order to be able to register and submit answers. This causes a lot of confusion on the faculty account because when they look at the roster, they have people who shouldn't be there, or people who have submitted on one account some questions and submitted on a different account a different set of questions and such. And whitelisted is meant in order to be able to refine that in order to guide that off of it. And it's been useful, but not 100% useful. And that's why we're switching to a roster system in order to try to remove that completely. Okay, graders. Graders are individuals that you've added to your course that are not students. They have the ability in order to grade questions. This is useful if you have questions that are open-ended, requiring a student in order to review and submit the grades as needed. And this provides a mechanism in order to decide on who can grade what. You can invite graders in order to register for the course directly and such. The most community colleges and lower divisional, well, certainly most community colleges and even four-year schools don't have explicit graders for classes, so you can oftentimes ignore them. But I'm in a large R1 institution where we have lots of graduate students, and many of those graduate students are paid in order to be able to do grading for classes. Especially for classes that are very large, like my 500 student general chemistry class. Students, because no students have enrolled in this class, this roster right here is essentially empty. But as students enroll, I'll start to get a list of rosters off of here. I can't show you this on a different course because of FERPA requirements, and I don't have it anonymized yet in order to be able to demonstrate a list of students that have artificial names, but it's pretty straightforward. Non-updated revisions. This is a little bit peculiar. This gets back into what I talked about before in terms of how to operate as a community. So we have multiple people who are creating multiple questions. Lots of questions are being honed and updated and augmented in a variety of different ways. And so we have a situation where an author may create a question and another instructor may want to use that question, because that's the whole point of having a community-based approach off of here. The problem is that if the author that created that question updates that question, what do you do about the student, not the student, the instructor that is using that question? Do we want to update it automatically? Do we want to provide the opportunity so that the instructor that has used the question is informed that the question has been changed, so they can come in and review it in order to see if they want to update it or keep the nature of the question as is from the time that they actually evaluated and brought it in? So it's that community-based approach that causes issues. So essentially, every time that an instructor or an author saves a question, it saves a revision of that question. So you can come back and decide if you want to be able to update that question, use the old version of that question. You can either make it automatic or you can manually connect it that's out there. This, again, is part of the nature of operating a community-based homework infrastructure and not a or one size fits all, here are your questions and that's it type of approach. Okay. Back to course properties. I mentioned non-updated revisions, accessibility redirects. I'll talk about this when I talk about questions, but the key point is that questions that we have on Adapt typically are bifurcated into the block associated with the questions that the students see, and then another block connected to this parts of the question that the students don't see unless they are registered as a requiring accessibility. Excuse me, unless they require accessibility accommodations. Not technically accommodations, an alternative. So in other words, you can make it so that you can have one question that that most students will see, and that students that have disabilities, like visual disabilities or other things that require different technologies in order to interact with that question, can switch to. This provides the opportunity for us to use technology that's not intrinsically accessible. For most of the students in the class, for example, questions that require dragging and dropping and more graphical based approach, which wouldn't be useful for students that have disability issues. But then if the students that do have disability issues can come in, they can then get a different type of question, for example, a series of multiple choice questions instead of a drag and drop based question. And that right there is perfectly fine in order to be able to advance the accessibility criteria that we want adapt, and actually all ed tech to be able to address. Tethered courses. I use the term tethered courses to talk about courses that are connected to my course if it happens to be an alpha course. In this case here, I did not create it as an alpha course, so the tethered courses are completely not necessary. In fact, it really should be grayed out here, and we're probably going to change that in the near future. Assignment group weights, that's essentially coming in and we have assignments, we have courses, we have, let me phrase that. Every assignment is connected to a specific topic, whether it's homework or it's laboratory discussions. And this is essentially, if I want to use ADAPT as my learning management system, in other words, I want to be able to do the calculations for grades on ADAPT, not on my personal LMS. This is a mechanism in order to say 20% of my class is midterm 1, 20% is midterm 2, 30% is final, labs, etc. That's the math that you actually put onto this thing. And then correspondingly, we can identify what the breakdown is for grades, such that I'm able to get the grading for the class. This is not terribly new to most of you who've been exposed to learning management systems. But again, if I'm not using ADAPT as an LMS, if I'm passing the grades over to LMS directly, or manually, it could be either LTI or just dumping the grades and then bringing it over. This doesn't have any applicability for people. Ungraded submissions. When I have questions on here that are open-ended, where it's intended that students go in and grade questions, this provides a mechanism to identify which assignments have questions that students haven't graded. And it's just an overview in order to make sure that the graders are indeed grading the questions that they have available that's out there. Embed properties are not overly important. That's if you, for this conversation, that's the ability in order to embed questions into other platforms. Like if you want to embed it into your LMS or you have some other website that you want to be able to do, and you can identify how you want the questions to be presented. Testers are students, not students, they're organizations that use ADAPT as their testing center technology. This is largely in Little Rock, Arkansas, where the faculty member can load up their exam onto ADAPT, and the testing center can come in and open it up and then proctor it right there with the students. We have analytics in place. This is part of the Commons Conductor infrastructure. I discussed this at a presentation a couple hours ago. The video will be available when this video becomes available. But it's essentially an infrastructure in place in order to guide how students are interacting with your homework. Also, if you have a textbook, they're interacting with the textbook, being able to evaluate whether students are addressing specific learning objectives or learning outcomes, and just essentially giving a better infrastructure behind how students are using the resources that you've created. The gradebook, again, the gradebook here is not overly impressive because it's nothing there. And lastly, reset course. So reset course is the option in order to wipe out all student submissions, all student enrollments in that course. It's basically the nuclear response, and it's what we want to do for a class at least 100 days, preferably 100 days after the class is over, but no longer than 365 days after the class is over. The point is that we don't want to be hosting student data. We consider it to be radioactive, and we want it to be wiped clean. So we provide instructors the opportunity to come in and wipe their course clean, preferably to dump the gradebook directly or export the gradebook to their desktop before they do so, and put it out there so the course becomes clean again. Anyways, I digress. Let's go back to my course area. There we go. And at this point here, I want to be able to add. I oftentimes have people import an existing course before we start building a new import an existing assignment before we bring a new assignment in. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to find an assignment somewhere. I can either do a search through my course. The commons are a set of courses that are that the LibreText development team has been curating and hosting for people in order to access. And then all public courses are basically everything that's in the commons and anyone else who's created a course that we're interested in order to address. I can then select the course that's out here, and I can say that this happens to be, you know, Larry Mink's chemistry 210 or 2100 class. And then I can decide I want assignment 9. I can decide that I want the properties and the questions. I have the opportunity to just bring in the shell, but I'm just going to bring the properties and I can import it. And I just brought in his assignment. I didn't bring in any of his students, any of his student submissions. All I brought in was the assignment. It comes in with the group as homework. It comes in with the default, the available on and due date. So this is when students are able to start submitting. This is when students are able to not submit, subject to the late policy that I'll mention in a moment. This tells me the status, which means it's closed. So students that would be enrolled in this class, if I give them the access code and they've enrolled, they would see this entry right here, and they would see it's closed, but they're still able to go through the question in order to see it. There's a few action items here. The first one is accessing the open grader. That's useful if you're using open-ended questions. But if all your questions are auto-graded, then that doesn't really help out significantly, although it's useful at times in order to identify how students have submitted questions, even for auto-graded purposes. This right here are properties associated with it, which I'll be going in a second. This right here gives you the ability in order to clone. That's essentially copy that course. So if I copy this, I'm going to do this, and it's going to create a new version of that one that's just titled copy and has the same questions on here. So in this case here, there are 8 questions. And here, those are the same 8 questions. It's a different assignment. It has a different assignment number connected to it, but it has the same set of questions that I can then independently control and run forward. Again, the shown button essentially is a master circuit breaker that makes it so that students don't see that question in place. Let me close my Thunderbird. In this case here, I can make it so that only students would see this one, irrespective of whether this is available or not available. It's just a master circuit breaker for students. Anyways, I digress. Let's just take a quick look here. Here are the 8 questions. If I click on one of these questions, I will then see the questions in a series. So here's question 1. This shows you the information of the solution. If I want to be able to do that, I can then look at question 2, question 3, question 4, and just cycle all the way through that's connected to them. These are a few issues associated with how you use questions in the assignment. If you don't want to look at that, you can click that button, and it gives a much more streamlined presentation of the questions, that these are the questions that you have. Each question has an attribution telling you where they came from, the license, and in this case here, the source of the assignment. This right here should probably be changed to the OpenStax link. And then you can go here and you can say this one here is also an OpenStax question, while this one right here is, I think, also an OpenStax question. So anyways, we have lots of questions on our corpus other than OpenStax questions, but these are the questions that this individual, Larry Mink, used for creating his courses. So this right here is, again, an assignment. I want to be able to look at the properties of the assignment, just like we looked at the properties associated with the course. It has a series of options here. These are different sets of options in the course because an assignment has a different set of issues off of here. I want to skip over case study notes. That's useful for a specific type of assignment that's used as case study. This was developed in partnership with the Chippewa college in Wisconsin for building next generation nursing questions. But the infrastructure around this case study approach can also be used in many other fields that use case studies. For example, law, business, even some aspects of sciences have case studies as a mechanism in order to learn material. Anyways, I'm going to go to summary. Summary gives me a general overview associated with this specific assignment. Who gets to see it, when it's open, when it's closed. This has a specific 2 deadlines. I'll talk about that in a second when I talk about late policies. It tells me the assignment type, that's real type, percentage, and a handful of other things. This is best talked about them individually when I actually go through them in the properties. So these are the properties of the assignment. Once the assignment is created, it generates a URL that you can hand out to students in order to access that assignment, if that happens to be useful for you. Alternatively, students can log in and see that an assignment is due there. If you prefer to have that as a QR code instead of a text-based code, you can copy that code right there and paste it into where resources out there. I tend to use this in my videos rather than in other sources or other places to put the data. Anyways, I have the name of the assignment. I have the ability in order to change the name upon saving. I have a public description and a private description, just like I had for the course, in which the public description students are able to see what the details are associated with that. It gives students some context about what the assignment is useful for. The private description is meant, again, for private notes connected to that assignment. In this case here, I get to decide if I want the questions to be used summatively or formatively. So in this case here, formative means that students need to sign in, and that when they do, when they submit a question, submit an answer to a question, they then get evaluated, and that evaluation, that score, gets put into their grade book or gets passed into the grade book into their learning management system, standard way that you expect homework to operate. Formative means that the students don't need to sign in order to be able to access that. We don't actually keep track of them, and it's oftentimes useful if it's real time for them to get feedback on their performance off of that, and that's what we have also in place in Adapt. This is an assignment group that we designated as homework. I could just as easily say it's a midterm quiz, lab, or create new groups off of here. I can decide if this course is internal, which means that it's Adapt based. If it's external, that means it's something like putting scores into our learning management, into Adapt, like it were learning management system. For example, if I had them go do a field trip, and I can count how many people went, and I say attendance gives you 100%. I can have an entry associated with that. Okay, so now we get into a bit more details in terms of how the assignment is used, and that's the points per question. So we can designate the points per question either by indicating what the points are per question. This is question 1, it has 10 points. This is question 2, it has 12 points. This is question 3, this has 8 points. You can go about that and manually put it all in place. Alternatively, you can come in and say that you want the set number of points per assignment, and it will then divide the number of points that you added to the assignment by the number of questions evenly, and then put that across there. That's convenient. So if you have homework, you always want the homework to be 100 points, irrespective of whether you have 8 questions, 9 questions, 10 questions, or 11 questions that's out there. You want 100 points out there so they can actually register that accordingly. Or students can interpret that and use that effectively. So if I were to do this thing, I can say this has 100 points constructively. If I were to flip this thing, it doesn't have that aspect in place. So anyways, okay. So now the next issue is assignment type. So I have the ability in order to have 4 types of assignments. One is real time, where the students submit the answer and they get a response directly about their performance in that question. This is really useful for formative learning exercises. They have the opportunity in order to get access to the solutions. So if the solutions are well fleshed out, pedagogically useful solutions, they can actually learn from their mistakes right at the point of making those mistakes. Delayed grading is more summative in the sense that students submit the scores and then we evaluate them after the fact. Actually, more specifically, we may evaluate them instantly, but we don't share them until a specific date and time that we want to be able to open it out. That means that we have the ability in order to introduce open-ended questions into the delayed question infrastructure. So an infrastructure such that, or an organization such that faculty may have questions that require grading by humans. They may write an essay, for example, or submit work done or something like that, or report. And that can never be done real time because you would have to sit there and evaluate the submission instantly upon the time that they're doing it. So it's a fundamentally different type of assignment. Learning tree assignments are assignments that are organized around learning trees. Learning trees are our adaptive learning infrastructure. I can show it quickly to you once this is done, but I want to be able to make sure that we have the completion in order to be able to add questions to our assignment. So hold off on that. Lastly, we have clicker assignments. So if you want to use Adapt in order to take the place of your in-class clicker system, like iClicker or Turner Tech, without having to pay the $35 to $55 that they are charging students, you can use Adapt in order to do that. It has a fundamentally different approach for doing things because faculty come up and they decide using the web interface whether a question is open and closed in class, and they have a minute or two for the students to then submit their scores, typically via their phones. Bring your own devices. It can also use computers for doing so, and we have a phone app that will be released very soon in order to be able to facilitate that mode of operation. Okay, we have the opportunity in order to identify how many allowed attempts that we want students in order to be able to have available. We can decide if we want to give penalties for incorrect submissions. So in this case here, 5% is being deducted for every incorrect submission that's out there. So they can submit an unlimited number of times, but each time is 5%, which means that they need to think a little bit more before submitting. They don't just basically start plugging in numbers randomly as they start to progress. We can decide if we want students to be able to access the hint that we have available for questions, if questions have that. And if they do have them, we can decide if we want to add a hint penalty. Most people don't provide that, but some people may want to use it as a modality of how they operate. I'm just going to say no here. Then we have solutions that are available. We have the opportunity such that students can see the solutions at some point when they do the real-time grading automatically. Like, for example, we have an opportunity that they say give up. I'm not sure if that's the right term that we use anymore, but basically it says, I'm done with this problem. Give me the solution to the problem. And once they get the solution to the problem, they're unable to resubmit to that problem because they have the solution to the problem right there. So it's silly in order to let them have access to submitting again. If the student, but we have the ability to make it manual, which means that the faculty member can decide when they want the solutions to be released. Because they may want to release it at a certain time, or they may be building the solutions, depending upon the feedback that they get from the students and how they use it. They can switch obviously between one or the other. You can think of this as sort of delayed versus real time, using the same parlance that's up there. Algorithmic. So several of the technologies that we have in place in Adapt has the capabilities in order to provide questions algorithmically, which basically means instead of asking a series of numbers or something like that, and such as students submit a single question and a single number, let me phrase it, the correct answers is a single number, and every student has the same question. You can make it so it's algorithmic, so it varies the numbers such that the final result has to change to be consistent with what they're supposed to be learning for that question or demonstrating proficiency for that question. And every student has a different number. That makes it more difficult for students in order to be able to just quickly look over their shoulder and see what the answer is for their colleague and just plug it in and make it work. Yeah. Again, not all question types have the ability in order to be able to do algorithmic, and you can decide if you want to be able to make it algorithmic there, and then every student gets a different question if those questions are designed that way. You can have a late policy. In this case here, the late policy is set to accept late with a deduction. Uh, Actually, we have a little bit of a my we should be able to not accept late, which means the deadline is a deadline and that's it. They can't submit anything. You could submit such that the students will submit, and it puts a little bit of a notification that lets you know that that question was late, and it's up to you to decide if you want to have any feedback associated with that student's performance by submitting late off of the record or off the score. And the last one is if you want to be able to make a deduction associated with that, and you can come in and say 5% late every 24 hours or just once. And it will start to take points off depending upon how late the students are with their lab. We will implement a floor here. So you can basically say 5% every 24 hours until it gets to 50%, and then it's flatlined at 50% until the remainder of the class. So there's always some incentive for the students in order to be able to submit their work, because if they don't have any incentive, they may be inclined to just basically say, I'm not going to do that assignment because there's no reason for doing so. This is included in final score. This is just basically if you want to be able to pull it out and use it, for example, as extra credit or formative use, you can go about doing so. You can provide instructions there. We're just about done here. We have the opportunity in order to do sampling. So if you make a whole lot of questions in your assignment, for example, 24 questions in your assignment, you can make it so the students can have 3 questions randomly selected that they then have access to. This is different than algorithmic, where algorithmic is the same question but uses math in order to change quantities around or change order of things. This right here has 3 independent, let me phrase it, 24, in the example I gave, independent questions that 3 are grabbed from and shown to students. I use these things for pre-labs, where I can say, here are 20 questions associated with identifying if the students read their pre-labs, and then it picks 3 of them for the students to pull from. And that's useful in order, again, to remove the issues of being able to look over shoulders and quickly address questions that are out there. Notifications, that's an infrastructure, or that's a feature in order to make it so that students will get notified via email that a assignment is due a certain period of time before the assignment is due. Typically it's set to 24 hours. However, students have the ability in order to customize it on their interface when they want notifications to be done. So some may want 6 hours, some may want 1 hour, some may want 36 hours. It's up to them. We now have the ability in order to handle assigned tos, which essentially says who has access to this question, when, and where. So in this case here, it's selected everybody. But if I had different sections, I can identify the sections. I have different students enrolled in here. I can identify the different students. So if I have students that require accommodations, I can say this student right here needs the due date to be longer than the average or the other students in the class, and such. So anyways, this one right here is saying everybody in the class has this problem due at March 5th today at 2:34 p.m., which is when I pulled this in. The due date is coincidentally the same date, so we would need to change that to a different date, like March 8th at 2:34 p.m. And because this is has a late deduction option, we have a final due date that they need to be able to submit before we can grade. For example, that may be something like the end of the class. Because once you've submitted the grades in the class, you're no longer going to be accepting late submissions for assignments because grades are already done, the class is already over. But you can also move that to different dates and times than the end of the class, just as long as it's after the original due date that's there. So I'm just going to save this because I changed a few things around here. It's given me a few policies because I changed things randomly. So let's not worry about this. This just shows you a little bit of example of what's going on and some issues associated with being able to change these things. For example, it doesn't want us to be able to change the total number of points while the assignment is open because the students have already seen the scores. So you want to be able to force the close, and then you can go in and modify it. So anyways, I digress. I've wiped those things clear. So if this were more time, if this were a workshop, I'd have you guys go through several different steps: importing an assignment, making an assignment. I'm just going to make an assignment right now. Well, actually, if I make the new assignment, it has the same interface that I used in order to go through here. I don't want to, actually, I want to do something different. I'm going to clone this assignment and just bring the properties, which means I'm not bringing in the questions for it. So I'm making an empty assignment right here, and it doesn't have any questions. So that was just going over the properties. There are a handful of other properties here that are important in order to be able to manipulate these things, but we don't have the time in order to be able to discuss that. But I just want to be able to lay the groundwork of adding existing questions to our assignment. And we can add questions in several different ways. So if I click the button, add questions up here, I have the ability in order to add questions via the question bank or via direct import. So the issue that we have here, and I'm going to go to one of these other assignments. Now, of these two options, I prefer bringing questions into an assignment based off of the ID number. So every question has an ID number. That question ID number is the second number in this hyphenated version here. So 123 121 is that question. Remember, that's the lowest level that I was talking about, the library level. The first number, the first part of this hyphenated, is the assignment number. So this basically says that this question is used in this assignment number. This assignment number is the assignment that we're looking at. If we look at a different assignment number, like the other copy of this, it would have that same number, but that number would be different because it's a different assignment. Now, the issue that I'm bringing up here is that if you have this number, that's all you need in order to be able to view that question or add that question, because it just basically tells you what is the number associated with the question. So I'm going to copy it by using this button right here. And if I import, I'm just going to paste that. It's going to import that question. And there it is, that question. And it has the same number, 123 121, but this question here is different. So this is 58730 for the assignment number. This is 58732 because it was a second one created after that the first assignment was done. So that gives you the ability to browse through any other course that's there by going to the dashboard and looking at public courses and saying, okay, I'm going to look through public courses. And I'm going to look at governmental agency. I'm just grabbing something like here, and I can just basically parse through and say, oh, I'm looking through the assignment, and right up here below the title is the ID number. And I can just say, I like this one. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to add it. I'll add it to this assignment here in the same way that we do. Now that's browsing and copying and pasting. Like I said, I like that a lot because we have a lot of hierarchies. We have courses that are in commons, public courses, your own courses that may be private or public. It may be difficult in order to be able to find these questions in a variety of different ways, but you can parse through all the different sources by going through the question bank. So in that case there, if I do a search through, let's say, my questions are the questions that I've created in my corpus. Personally, as an instructor, not the entire corpus of content out there, but I can just do a search through all public courses, and then grab this Spanish course, and then he has only brought in one assignment here, so I can then grab that assignment and I can just do a plus off of here. I don't need to press that or plus it here, and I automatically add it to my assignment. Again, you can add questions by direct import of ID if you have the ID number, which of course you have right here, or you can do a search through the question bank in order to look at my questions, my courses, commons, etc. And as soon as you find the question you like, you can then click on the little button here and it adds it directly. The issue behind that is that you have to dig around and start to find content in various sources off of here. I will mention that If you do search questions, you have the approach in order to do a search through the corpus of content. So you can come in and do a title, for example, calculus. And these are questions that have calculus in the title. We have lots of other questions that involve calculus, but they don't have calculus in the title. I can do the plus on here and automatically add it in the same way as you would if you did a search through or you browse through other people's question bank. This is gets a little bit of time in order to address, but it's not a significant amount of effort in order to go through. The key point is that we have 220,000 questions right now of organized typically in a variety of different courses. Some of them are at the library. You can do searches in order to find these things. You can browse in order to find those questions. And once you have those, you can import them directly to your course. And now you can see I had this Spanish course and this calculus course, the Spanish question, calculus question, and American history question in with these chemistry questions. So this would be a very disturbing assignment for a student in order to take because it bounces across multiple fields, but it's the mechanism that you use in order to be able to add questions here. You can remove questions by just dumping it right here. And you use that in order to curate your course. That's the upshot. That's all that I really wanted to discuss today. You can create courses. You know some of the properties of courses. You can create assignments. You can, some of the properties of assignments. There are a few things I didn't discuss off of there. You can find questions in the corpus. You can add the questions in several different manners, and then you're able to actually use adapt constructively. Now, there's a lot more associated with adapt than that. We haven't discussed about how to write questions. We haven't discussed some of the other applications of grading questions, the open grader, the statistics, being able to manipulate the database and other aspects. But you don't need to know many of those features in order to be able to use adapt because it's just like using a learning management system. There's a lot in the learning management system that the typical instructor doesn't know about, but they're there if you actually need to use them for your specific application. So with that, I'm going to end this. If people have some questions, feel free to chime in. I will be, we've recorded this. I will be posting this onto our YouTube channel. It takes a little bit of time in order to process these videos and submit them. I might actually be starting doing it tonight, but there's a good chance that I won't be able to get to it until this weekend. And then they'll certainly be up next week for everyone to have access to and review it at a later date. And if people are in, well, there's no PowerPoint presentation for here. For the other ones, I have PowerPoint presentations. I can actually provide that as necessary. So with that, happy adapting. If there are any other questions, and I see a few texts in the chat, I'm willing to also address them as necessary. Actually, Peggy, you're still here, or Peg, so I can just address your question here. So if you want to use 20 or 30 questions from a specific assignment, you would not be more efficient to copy the entire assignment and then delete the ones that you want? Yeah, you can go about doing that if you want. It works just as constructively. That's out there. The other thing I may mention here is that if you copy this assignment, you can do it one by one. But if you copy this button up here, it copies all the assignment IDs into a comma separated thing that you can then paste. So that's the same thing as that you want to do is in terms of bringing in the entire assignment and then restructuring it. It's up to you in terms of doing which way you want to go about doing it. When you do paste it, you can delete the entries you want, but you need to know which IDs connected to which question that you are interested in. There was another question or comment. So it looks like you can select multiple questions for import rather than copy and paste. Yeah, that's basically what I said. So sorry for repeating myself. You already picked it up. And any other questions? Everybody else looks like you're closing it out. So I'm going to stop recording.